Thank you, Natasha. And yeah, before we go into the presentation, I would like to say, um, in days gone by, the dugong was the animal that we assumed that was identified as a mermaid by ancient seafarers. Because even in my mythology and also through excavations and also studies, I've shown not only in Sri Lanka on a global scale, because we have done some work in Malaysia and the Red Sea as well, and they've shown that the main contender for the mythological mermaid is a dugong, because out at sea, when you do come across a female nursing a calf, it looks very similar to a human feeding a young. Shall we move on to the slides, please? Yeah, and the reason I put this slide is I probably majority of you guys know what a dugong is, and have probably seen it not in Sri Lanka, from other waters in other countries, and also perhaps you've seen newspaper articles on the internet. Basically, these are rough introduction to the dugong. The dugong in Sinhalese is known as the Mudura, and in Tamil, especially in the northern part of Sri Lanka, it's known as Kadalpanti. Because and I also like to mention that the dugong previously, though it had a much wider distribution around Sri Lankan waters, now it's basically restricted to the Gulf of Mannar, the Pork Bay in the northern waters of Sri Lanka. And the dugong is closely related to the sea cow, which was basically hunted into extinction within a short span of time for its meat and oil. And the Stella sea cow basically inhabited the waters, the colder waters around in the Bering Strait. And it is in fact much more closely related to the dugong than the manatees itself. Shall we move to the next slide, please? And this will, you'll get a rough estimate of the Stella sea cow. It was much larger than the dugong. It was 30 feet, whereas a mature dugong will be roughly about 8 feet. Next slide, please. And also the dugong comes from a very ancient lineage of animals which evolved in the Miocene period. And then they diverged, split. And as you can see from this chart alone, that the manatee, though is the closest relative to the dugong, it split in from the dugongs several millions of years ago. Next slide, please. And the closest living relative to the dugong today is not a marine species, but the elephants and also hyrax. Next slide, please. Which the hyrax are of course found in Africa, and also when you get the difference between the dugong and the next slide, please, and the manatee, you would see that the manatee, the snout alone, the features show that the dugong is obligate bottom feeder. It only feeds at the bottom of the surface, whereas the manatee feeds at the surface at different strata of the water level, but the dugong only feeds at the bottom layer. You can see from the mouth structure itself. And our research has shown, when you come to the historical aspect, that earlier, basically from excavations carried out in Manthai, that's Mantota, that's an ancient seaport in the northwestern part of Sri Lanka, very close to Mannar. Dugong's bones were uncovered. And these dugong bones were basically of the extinct species of dugong called Myodugong brevicranius. When you say brevicranius, what they mean is it had a much smaller cranium, and this animal is supposed to have been much smaller than the extant dugong. Next slide, please. And also, there have been a lot of archaeological studies done, and what we have basically seen from the findings from the archaeological studies, that the dugong, though we think the demand for dugong flesh has been a recent component, that for the excavations what we have carried out and what has been unearthed shows that for over 3,000 years that dugongs have been part and parcel of the human diet, ancestral diet, and also at the same time that they played sort of a spiritual part as well, because in fact, the dugong's hide were used to uh, for boats, as a leathering for the boat. The oil was used to treat timber, and also at the same time, it had apparently even not in Sri Lanka, but in the southern part of India, because Sri Lanka and India, we share the same population of dugongs. And in that part, they have even unearthed talismans made out of dugong bone, and even artifacts such as pendants and so on that is made out of dugong bone. But we are yet to sort of unearth something like that, of that nature, from Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. And these are the bones uncovered from Sri Lanka. And every bone, basically, from that ancient site, had cut marks on it. And when the archaeological department did the analysis, it showed that all these bones were basically cut using microliths, which are depicted on the left-hand side of the screen. And these are the very photographs of the microliths that were unearthed at Mantoda. Next slide, please. And also, I would like to mention that even in Jetavanarama, in an ancient monastery, we also unearthed certain artifacts carved out of dugong bone. And one such artifact is a palace-shaped artifact depicting or resembling more of a male genital. So that's why, like I mentioned earlier, that the dugongs have played a much more spiritual part in Sri Lankan history, but we are still trying to piece together the jigsaw puzzle to find out exactly what sort of role it played. And also the previous slide, please. Also the blue icons here show the historical range of the dugong, and the yellow show the current status of the dugong. So the blue, apparently from historical excavations and also from published literature, it shows that the dugong had apparently inhabited the east coast of Sri Lanka as well, because you do get lush seagrass meadows there, because the dugong is a strictly herbivorous marine mammal, and it feeds solely on seagrasses. Seagrasses are very, very similar to terrestrial grass. And in fact, we could actually say that the dugong plays the role of cattle on land. The dugong plays out at sea because they are grazers. And the dugong also, what happens is when it feeds on one area, say for example, it is feeding in Sri Lankan waters, and that area, the seagrass is exhausted and only the rhizomes are left, the dugong moves to other lush feeding grounds. It could be even in the Indian side of the part, on the on the Pog Bay. So once the seagrass regenerates, they move back to our waters or to the Indian waters. So they move to and from India and Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And also from our studies, because we did a cultural scoping survey as well, that was part of the Dugong and Seagrass Conservation Project, which was a large project carried out in 8 countries, and Sri Lanka was one of the countries. And during the culture study, we carried out a questionnaire survey, and that showed, because when we questioned the local populace in the northwestern and northern part of Sri Lanka, they in fact told us that back during the forefathers' times, dugong meat was supposed to have aphrodisiac properties as well, and even the meat was used as a sort of a talisman, where a small component of the meat was hung around individuals' necks to keep away ill omen. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, and through our surveys, the threats that we came across, that is the major part, the component that we were focusing on, is to find out the threats to dugongs. And you get the natural predators such as tiger sharks, killer whales, and also dugongs are prone to adverse weather conditions. And there are several human-induced threats as well. And through this survey that we carried out, we had a questionnaire survey as well, and the results from that showed that next slide. Can you come to the next slide? And the next slide, please. No, the previous, sorry, previous slide of the pie chart. Yeah, and this basically shows the component. These are all the results from our questionnaire survey. So 57% of the people, the population, the local population in that area, which are majority of them are fisher. At least 90% of the people in those areas are fisher. And they say that the main reason for the decline of the dugong population is the direct take of dugongs. Because there is a huge fishery that is sort of even to date it still continues. Sorry, the illegal hunting of dugong, and they also fall victim to bycatch, and there were several individuals, as you can see, that did not even want to answer the questions because they themselves are sort of actively engaged in the dugong meat trade. Next slide, please. The next slide, the one with the nets. Yeah. And from our studies, the major threat for dugong bycatch is the bottom set net, what you call madudal. Those are basically laid for rays and skate, and also certain species of shark. And also the gill net also is a component what we out of the fishing methods that we studied, that we saw that the high rate of dugongs are caught. And there is another new late sort of a late addition to fishing methods in the eastern half of the Gulf of Mannar and the Pork Bay is what they call stake nets, and those are also sort of have a huge impact on the dugong. And in fact, there are certain fisher in those areas that purely engage in that type of fishery to catch dugong. Because when the dugong enters those walls of death, basically, they don't die, they don't get entangled, but they basically come into an area, and then they're kept there till they're butchered later on, either used in dynamiting or harpoon. Next slide, please. And these are the rough idea of a stake net. You can see the photograph on the left-hand side is from the Gulf of Mannar, and on the bottom left is the stakes. They are basically about 9 to 10 meters in length. So we're talking about 20, 30 feet high. And they're basically mounted at the bottom, and the net on the right hand side, you get this huge net, and the animals that swim, it's basically like a wall. You cannot swim through it, so you're basically sort of led into an air, sort of a holding chamber. Next slide, please. And also what we notice is dynamite fishing. That is a huge issue in those areas, not only for dugongs, but also for fish, other species of fish as well. Because one common we saw is from our surveys that when a fisher who is out fishing, who is going after another species, when they do encounter dugongs, they with modern day technology, they have the facility to phone or radio back to people who actively engage in dugong hunting. They basically call them and inform them that the dugongs are found in this particular area, and they give the GPS coordinates. And the guys who actually kill dugongs, they go there, and the easiest method to sort of kill the animal is using dynamiting, because the impact from the dynamite basically ruptures the animal's internal organs and it dies. Next slide, please. And also harpooning. Harpooning was done, even today they do harpooning even for small cetaceans and so on. But since this whole, the harpoon itself is large, and sometimes the boats are sort of inspected by the Coast Guards and the Sri Lankan Navy, they don't use harpoons as much as what they did back in the past. I would say back about 15 to 20 years ago. And also there's something I do have to mention, that we have been carrying out dugong research for about 18 years now. And during the days of the war, when the war was like the early parts of 2000, we couldn't go out to sea as often, and we couldn't carry out these surveys in a sort of a comprehensive way. It was like sporadic. So from the data that we have got through these surveys, we have noticed that actually, during the war, the dugong population actually sort of recovered from what it was. But sadly, after the war ended, there was no sort of people were allowed to go out to sea, the fisher were allowed to go out, there was no restrictions or anything of that sort. And then they gradually started killing dugong again when they started encountering them. So that's what we have seen. And now what we're doing, trying to do is change that trend. Next slide, please. And our surveys basically have shown that minimum of 2 dugongs are taken on a monthly basis. Minimum. These are what it goes recorded. Unrecorded, we don't know how many animals are basically killed. And now these two individuals are actually going from 2010. They were victims of dynamite fishing. So there are instances like this where the law enforcement agencies, such as the Navy, the Coast Guards, have come on board and helped us, capture the culprits. But there are so many instances where the fishery and the people who actually kill dugongs are not brought to book, and also several instances where the deaths go unreported, because some of those islands in the northern part of Sri Lanka, when we visited, in fact had small parts of dugong bones on them. That shows that the animals are actually taken to those islands where basically you don't get any humans there, and they are butchered in those islands especially under the cover of darkness, because majority of the animals that are killed are kept out at sea, either in nets, or they tie some sort of weight and sink the carcass to the bottom, and in the night they go and retrieve it and bring to these islands and then butcher them. Next slide, please. And this is another dugong that was a victim of bycatch. It was entangled in a madudal, a bottom setting, and this was to show in Mullikulam. Next slide, please. And also we have seen that since of late, the last 5 years, we have seen a significant number of calves, dugong calves, being taken and also falling victim as a bycatch. And the reason being the high catch rate of dugongs, and why most of the fisher, knowing it's illegal, why they go after dugong is because it's a lucrative business. It's a very lucrative business. 2 years ago, when we carried out surveys, dugong meat, a kilo of dugong flesh basically sells between 900 to 1,500 rupees per kilo, and an adult, one individual can fetch about between 600 to 800,000 rupees. And the other is, it's a sort of a delicacy in those areas. And once a dugong is brought to show, within 1 hour, immaterial of the size of the animal, within 1 hour the meat is sold. And there are people who in fact buy it, and even in the dry form it's transported to other parts of the country as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? And I think we lost the presentation, the PowerPoint. And yeah, anyway, I'll go on elaborate. We have been conducting awareness programs in the northern and the northwestern and the northern part of Sri Lanka. And basically, when you say awareness programs, we've been conducting at schools, as you saw in the videos, and also to the general fishing community in those areas. And though we have also been, when you say awareness, we done on the left hand side, you can see a booklet that we did that is on about the dugong, the whole biology, the importance of the dugong to the ecosystem and why it should be protected. We did a video clip to create awareness as well. It's available. It's a trilingual clip. It's available on YouTube, and also through our awareness programs, we did a questionnaire through them as well, and sort of got the feedback of the local people and asked them why, the reason for them to go after dugong, why did they kill dugongs. And these people purely, they know the fact that the dugong is a keystone species, and if the dugong is lost, that the whole ecosystem will collapse. So as a sort of a compensation for that, for them not killing dugongs, we have brought in alternative livelihoods. We have trained about 40 individuals in Vedatalativ as ecotourist guides, where they help in birding tours. Then they take people out to see the seagrass beds. And in fact, we are trying to sort of add in a component where there will be also dugong watching part. But we are still trying to get certain areas demarcated and declared as sanctuaries, and sort of promote dugong watching as well, because the dugongs share the same area as other two important species of cetaceans. One is the Indo-Pacific finless porpoise, and the other one is the Indian Ocean humpback dolphin, and they both are endangered on a global scale. Can I have the next slide, please? And these are the areas that we are in fact planning on, because through our studies we have seen that there are there are dugong hotspots, and these hotspots are the ones that we have highlighted in red. So we are trying to get them declared as marine sanctuaries so that we protect them. And these areas, why they are hotspots, is they have large extents of seagrass beds, and especially of species such as Halophila, Halodula, which are basically relished by the dugongs. And we did some analysis on the stomach content as well, and majority of the dugongs in Sri Lankan waters have found to be feeding on Halophila and Halodula species of seagrass. And the one in green is the Vedatalativ Nature Reserve, which is already a protected area. The area is blue. In blue is the Adams Bridge protected area, and also the Bari. So once we declare the other two, the one in the Mullikulam area, the Arippu, and the Vedatalativ area, this whole area can be connected as one big marine sanctuary. And perhaps if we are able to, and if we are successful in getting certain legislations passed to prevent fishing in those areas, and and allowing the fisher to fish in slightly more offshore areas away from the seagrass beds. So these are certain things that we are basically are trying to get these gazetted, and also get these passed by the relevant authorities. Next slide, please. And why these slides are there is just to show it is not only the dugong from those destructive fishing methods that I mentioned of earlier. These are also basically bycatch. The one on the left is all bycatch. These are just thrown away. And the right in the boat, you can see in the left hand corner there are a few shrimps there. So all that in the middle of seagrass, fish, conch, crab, and just bycatch that's going to be thrown away for a mere kilogram of lagoon shrimp. So these all these sort of destructive fishing practices will sort of come to an end when we are in fact trying to also introduce sustainable fishing methods, because there are certain types of nets that are prohibited, are banned in Sri Lanka, but a lot of the fishing in those areas use it. why they use it is one reason they might not know that is illegal. The next is because they do not have the funds to purchase the nets that are used, for sustainable fishing, and also they are not really checked on because we have to have regular patrolling in those areas to find, to bring people who are using illegal fishing nets to book, or rather than charging them and penalizing them, they can be given um, other nets that are, more sustainable, and the rate of bycatch is much less, which we are trying to in fact incorporate. But sadly in 2020 we were supposed to do this, but due to COVID-19 all our plans got delayed. So let's hope by next year we'll be able to sort of get the project up and running again. Next slide, please. And also, like I mentioned, these are the Indian Ocean humpback dolphin and the finless porpoise. So if we protect the dugong, we we have chance of protecting these species as well, because they all share the same biome, the same habitat. The humpback dolphin, the finless porpoise are also nearshore species, as like with the dugong. Next slide, please. These are angel shark. This again is victim of bycatch. This is juvenile because angel sharks grow quite large. So these animals are, they don't even have room to sort of reach adulthood and sort of sustain its population by mating and having. Yeah, next slide, please. And these are torpedo ray. Again, this was just thrown aside. These are all bycatch. So all these organisms play an important role in the seagrass beds to keep it, basically, because seagrass beds are also one of the largest areas that absorb carbon. It does much more than a rainforest when it comes to carbon sequestration. So that alone is very, very important. So the reason it gives us all the more reason to protect it with this day and age, people talking of climate change and so on. It is a very good reason for us to protect it. And while protecting it, as mentioned in the that small clip we showed at the beginning, the seagrass beds themselves are nursery grounds to a myriad of species of marine organisms, and especially important species such as torpedo ray, seahorses, angel sharks, so many other species, and also shrimps, sea snakes, name it is there, and even some of the larger marine fish, such as like even certain, not the large, these are tuna, the smaller species of tuna, they are fingerlings, the young hang out in seagrass beds, and once they mature, they go out to sea. So these studies have been, global studies have shown that there is an impact on the whole ecosystem if we do not protect the seagrass beds. And in turn, we have to protect the dugong because that's the animal that will keep the seagrass beds sort of in a pristine state. Because that, like we mentioned earlier, the dugong's fecal matter itself is sort of fertilizer to that whole area, and there are little organisms that feed on the prey, and certain species of fish and marine organisms, the young are like plankton. They're really small microbic animals, so they feed on these minute particles as nutrition. So we have to protect these animals for the future, and also to make sure that we have a healthy population of dugongs. And our studies have also shown that our awareness programs actually had quite an impact on the local populace, because they were willing to, in fact, turn from their destructive fishing practices if an alternative livelihood was introduced, and which we did. And sadly, after the COVID-19 pandemic, we have not been up there. We are hoping to go there next month and see whether the fisher that we managed to convert are still, indulging in their old practices, or are they, sort of convert, or they are basically doing the new practices that we introduced to them. And we, in fact, certain fisher through this project, that's a dugong and seagrass project, we in fact gave them about 200 to 300 nets as well that are more sustainable than the ones utilized by them now. Sorry. Next slide, please. Right. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for that, Ranil. We do in fact have a few questions. The first one being, how can we engage in these kinds of projects and conservation programs as the public?
Sorry, I lost you. I think I have an issue with my connection. You're breaking up.
Let me just repeat it. How can we, as the public, engage in conservation programs and seagrass of dugongs and seagrass projects at the moment?
Yeah,
sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Basically, yeah, as the public, you can, because I would say from my experience, the major component is citizen science. So to protect a species or an ecosystem, we cannot do it alone. We need a lot more. We need an army of people to go in there and do the work to sort of protect it. And also, as general public, what we can really get is when you do visit those areas, feedback. If you see some sort of organism, that a marine animal or a fish or a reptile or whatever that was to show, if you can take photographs and share it with us. Also, even if you see, like, there are certain things that go overlooked by us because we are not there all the time. So there are certain instances where, in fact, a few people that I have taken into our cadre is from Veditalathi, who have been, giving information on the dugong fisheries. Some of the information that I gave out now is not what we purely found on our research, through our research, but where, the people, the populace, the local populace, the public in that area, they have been giving their feedback and what they see on a daily rate. And you can definitely get involved. Like I said, that's the best way is like citizen science. And when you see it, since everyone has a smartphone nowadays, you can take a photograph and send it to us. And in fact, we are trying to have a sort of a central repository where we introduce a citizen science program where they can upload whatever they see through their mobile. It will be application app where they can upload the photograph of whatever animal they see, and it automatically in turn we get the GPS coordinates, and these can be used even for our red listing process. When we are assessing the status of animals, also we can utilize it. So we are trying to introduce something of that sort, but there were a few hiccups because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are trying to get everything rolling in the near future.
We have another question asking, aren't there any law enforcement practices in place to monitor and thereby minimize the hunting? And the measures adopted to reduce or mitigate the hunting, have they been effective?
Yeah, they have to a certain extent in certain areas. We do have certain legislations, and we do have, in fact, different departments within the government and also law enforcement agencies that have been, delegated to do this work. So certain areas we have been very, very successful. It all depends on the hierarchy in that area as well. So how enthusiastic they are to sort of carry out these and protect the environment. So we have seen that happening as well.
We have another question. How many poachers have faced penalties, or are they left off after being caught by law enforcement?
Yeah, a very good example is the two dugongs I showed in the boat, which were that was recorded in 2010, and that time I was working at Nara, and we did take the culprits to court, but sadly within 10 days they were out, and there was no fine of any sort imposed, because apparently, according to at that time what had been gazetted, we cannot sort of charge a person for killing dugongs, though it's a protected species. So we do have certain shortfalls, but now we have basically ironed out the creases, and we are trying to bring in a much more harsher penalty when people are caught with sort of illegal who are basically actively involved in illegal fishing methods.
And one last question. How far along is the Ministry of Environment in getting the sanctuaries gazetted? Has a time frame been set?
Yeah, in fact, the proposed 3 sanctuaries, everything has been done. The cabinet papers also have been prepared. One has already been gazetted, so the other 2 should be gazetted within the next few months, hopefully before the end of this year. And the Ministry of Environment, mainly the Department of Wildlife Conservation, this all comes under the purview of the Department of Wildlife Conservation. So they have been very, very instrumental in getting these areas declared as protected areas. And in fact, from the government side as well, they have shown keen interest. But what we have to do is not only protecting these areas. Once they are protected, we have to protect them. Once they're declared as sanctuaries, we have to do the protecting part ourselves, and also get proper law enforcement officers or agencies to patrol those areas in a proper way.
And one final question that's just come in. Are there any census methods being done to track the numbers of dugongs in our waters?
Yeah, basically we carry out the same sort of census technique as what we do for cetaceans, that is the line transect census method. And we also do snorkeling, because you can monitor the feeding trails of dugongs on the seagrass beds. So we have been doing the general census technique we use is the line transects method, where we zigzag to and from. So whatever we record on the way is the GPS location is taken, and if and when possible, we take a photograph, because the surface behavior of the dugong is very unobtrusive as well. You don't see much at the surface unless you're in a sort of a very high boat. But we use the 19-foot fiberglass boats, which those are the only boats that are available in those areas. So those are the ones we use. So we don't have sort of a elevated platform to look into the horizon. So as and when we do come across a dugong, we take the GPS coordinates, and we are, in fact, our Indian counterparts are also involved, and they're helping us, because we share, like I mentioned earlier, we share the same population. So what we are at the moment, we're looking at something like 100, but let's see in the future, perhaps it could increase, because there are certain areas that we haven't studied. That is the area on top of Jaffna, and in between India and Jaffna. So those areas are supposed to harbor other seagrass beds as well. So let's see.
Well, thank you so much, Ranil, for sharing your expertise and taking the time to share your insights today. And thank you to everyone for bearing with us through technical issues and for taking the time again to join us for this webinar. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with the FEO team, you can either reach us directly through our website or via Facebook and Instagram. So once again, thank you everyone for taking your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.